It's time now for us to manage those managerial challenges. And pulling something out of that first aid kit will be our author, Joan Underwood, who is a coach, talent development specialist, master trainer, and change practitioner. Good morning to you, Miss Underwood.
Good morning to you as well and to your viewers.
Yes. Now, this morning we're going to be talking about where the buck stops. Now, I don't have a buck. I have $1. Does it make a difference?
So here's the thing. As an individual contributor, you know you're responsible for the work that's on your desk at your station. So you're responsible for yourself. Once you become a manager, you become responsible for an entire team, an entire department. And things will go on, either because of us or in spite of us. And in those instances, the buck needs to stop somewhere. Someone needs to take responsibility when things go sideways for ensuring that we get back on track.
Okay, well, I guess in this instance, we can't say that it will be collective responsibility because I'm the manager wearing the hat. So, where does it stop?
It stops with you as the manager. So yes, there is collective responsibility, but at the end of the day, someone has to stand in the breach to own up for the situation, to ensure that the situation gets corrected. And as a manager, you've been assigned a team and you are ultimately responsible not just for your performance, but for the performance of your entire team or your entire department.
Now, sometimes in the midst of that management, say I have 7, I may have a situation where 5 are pulling, 2 are not. What do I do in that situation? Especially if they don't want to come up to the ante.
Okay, so at this point, I'll introduce 3 terms and we'll see how successful managers navigate those 3 terms. So the 3 terms are responsibility, blame, and accountability. So we know what we're responsible for. Those are duties that we have to execute, whether it's you as the manager or those other members of the team that you just mentioned. Everyone needs to know what's my responsibility, what's my contribution to the team. And so you have job descriptions that will tell you what your specific responsibilities are.
Now, if I could just stick a pin, that issue of job descriptions, I have been hearing so frequently, especially now in these COVID times, that's not in my JD. That's not in my JD.
All right. So that's why you have that ubiquitous clause, any other duties as assigned. Now, it doesn't mean that you put in unrelated things and expect someone to just do whatever. So they do need to be related to your substantive role and to the operation of the organization. So any savvy HR practitioner is going to ensure that there's such a clause in the statement of work conditions, because there's no way that in advance, when you're preparing the contract, you can think of every single duty that will ever come up that you will need to ask this individual to execute. So there does need to be that, any other duties clause so that you can capture it. But again, it's not something to be abused.
Okay. So point 2 and point 3. Well, before I go to point 2, what about exploitation? When I seek to enforce my will as a manager, am I really stopping the buck, or am I looking to spend an even greater dollar?
Okay, so let's lay the framework. So we have the responsibilities that have been communicated, which have been understood. All right. If, as you suggested, there's someone who's not carrying their weight, that's when accountability comes into play. And there's a very important distinction between accountability and blame. Blame is completely backwards oriented. You're looking at the past, and the objective is to punish. So if something goes wrong, you want to know who did that, who's responsible. and proceed to throw them under the bus, you proceed to punish them. That's the blame approach. Contrast that with accountability now, where the question is, what went wrong? Why did it go wrong? And what do we need to do to ensure that going forward, we do not have similar occurrences? So again, to contrast, blame is backward oriented and focused on punishment. Accountability is future oriented. It's focused on figuring out what went wrong, why it went wrong, and what systems and processes and changes, even with personnel, need to be put in place to ensure that going forward you get a better outcome.
Okay, so therefore they've done wrong. I don't call them out on it, and neither do I punish them. Where's their accountability to their responsibility?
So you absolutely do hold them accountable, but not in a way to name and shame or to blame. It's to look for an opportunity for learning. So if a mistake was made, why was this mistake made? Is there something wrong with the system, or is there something wrong with your understanding or your ability to operate within the system? How do we close that gap? Because remember, we're future oriented. So we're not dwelling on the past. The past is a point of orientation for us to figure out what happened with a view to moving forward to the future in a way that will give us better outcomes. So you're not blaming people, but you're holding them accountable for their actions or inactions.
Okay, so don't blame, but seek to correct in a way to take the company forward.
Absolutely.
Okay, Absolutely. So what else will this buck buy me within that? What are the other things I need to know outside of those three to ensure that it's done correctly and that we all learn in the process?
All right. So I love the question in terms of what the buck that stops with you, what does it buy you? It will buy you the trust of your people. Because if your direct reports know for a fact you're not going to throw them under the bus, you're not going to leave them out there hanging to face the music all on their own, they will trust you. It also buys you credibility with your clients, your customers, and others within the organization because they see that you're willing to step up to the plate and make things right. Now, you can show up as the person on whose desk or as whose workstation the buck is going to stop. You can show up as a victim, as someone who's powerless. Oh, I don't know what they did. I don't know how it happened. Or you can take ownership, right? Make yourself aware, investigate what happened, come back with solutions, own it. And that's how your stock goes up. So your buck will buy you trust, it will buy you credibility, it will buy you a reputation of being a problem solver and someone who holds him or herself accountable.
How can I ensure that that employee is not looking thereafter to exploit that trust platform that we have built? Because I may have to caution him or her about a few of these things, not blaming, not shaming, but I recognize that it tends to be a pattern in their on-the-job behavior. What then?
Okay, so then you need to have a conversation about expectations, performance standards. And oftentimes we don't communicate well around these things. We assume, oh, they know what they're supposed to do. So there's a conversation, a performance conversation that you have with your direct reports. Here are the standards that we expect in terms of your performance. Let's look at the reality in terms of where you are and engage them in that. So it's not just you telling them, but asking them questions. So how are you showing up? From your perspective, do you think that you're meeting the standards? And if they're not, then you have a conversation about the gap, what's required to close the gap. Again, not from a blaming perspective, but a beautiful question to ask if there is indeed a performance gap. How can we best support you to close this gap? So it may be a case where they say they need training, the equipment or, the processes may not be working as intended. And so as the manager, you then have the responsibility to help them to close the gap. But we come right back to the accountability. Because once you provide the support that they've identified that they need, you then say, so going forward, having provided you with the support, the expectation is now that you will meet these performance standards. You give them a time frame within which they are to come up to the standard. And in the event that they don't come up to the standard, then you may have some decisions to make about whether or not they're fit to continue in the role.
Okay, and with these standards that we're speaking to, could they also help to form the basis of, say, the individual's performance appraisal, if indeed there is that type of check and balance within that particular work environment?
That's exactly what I'm alluding to. And, in current HR best practice, we're moving away from the performance appraisal that happens once a year to more of a performance management or performance coaching approach. So think about it. Is it really the best course of action to only be having performance conversations once a year? So rather, it should be on an ongoing basis that you're engaging your people, that you're giving them feedback, identifying gaps that exist, coming up with performance improvement plans to close any existing gap. Even your high performers need this type of feedback, because if you have a high performer and you're just taking them for granted, it can have an adverse impact on their morale and their motivation. So you need to be giving them the positive reinforcement and giving them some stretch goals so that they feel challenged, they feel motivated, and they're constantly learning and growing in the role.
Okay, and I guess for the ones who we are seeing the deficits and the gaps in, continuous training would also play a key role.
Mm-hmm. So as an HR practitioner, I am very cautious when people look at training as a panacea, a solution for everything. Training is the appropriate response if there is a knowledge gap that needs to be closed, and there's some skills that you can also augment or enhance through training. However, the gap may be due to something else. So if it's a case of the systems are obsolete, or they're no longer fit for purpose, or the equipment is not, optimally efficient and effective in doing the job. So diagnosing the nature, the cause of the performance gap is very important. Yes, sometimes training will be the solution. Other times the gap may be something that's due to an attitude, for example, in which case training is not going to rectify an attitude. So there may need to be some counseling and some coaching that happens in order to effect the required change in attitude. So you first need to be a diagnostician in terms of identifying the source of this gap, what's the cause of the gap, and then applying a fit for purpose solution.
Okay, so tell me, Ms. Underwood, what should be my two main takeaways when I want to stop the buck?
Okay, first of all, don't view your people as the problem. View your people as potential problem solvers. Okay, and that mind shift can be very impactful. Think of how, if you're looking at somebody as a problem, how you're going to show up in that conversation, versus if you're looking at them as a potential problem solver, someone who can come up with solutions. You interact with them quite differently. The other thing, don't look at mistakes as fatal flaws. Rather, look at them as learning opportunities. What lessons can we extract from what went wrong here so that we move forward stronger, better positioned to serve our clients and each other?
Well, thank you for drawing that from the first aid kit for us, Ms. Underwood. It was a pleasure to have you this morning, telling us all about where the buck stops and how we need to stop blaming but become accountable and take responsibility. I wish you a pleasant Wednesday morning.
Thank you, and the same to you and yours.
I thank you kindly.